Well, that's so true about you often. I know my sister's a big fan. We're all CBC Radio fans in my house. And your voice definitely makes those little radios sound better. About end of tape, is there some way that I can be notified when you have about 5 minutes or something like that? Something in the 5-3, whatever you remember to signal. Okay. You can signal me with your hand down there. Yeah. Just your fingers will do. Don't throw the fingers. Okay. All right. Let me know. Anytime? Okay. Lister, insofar as you had a background in mathematics and science, how did you make the transition into theatre?
Well, it wasn't really that much of a transition because I went to a school in England. As we can all hear, I belong to an audible minority. And one of the features of that school was a drama connection. The school was called St. Paul's, and the Children of Paul's were a famous drama group in the 17th century. Beaumont and Fletcher wrote The Night of the Burning Pestle, for example, was written for the Children of Paul's. And it was, of course it wasn't really the same connection, but there was a kind of pretense that there was a connection. So there was a lot of drama going on, and I liked acting.
You ended up in the University of British Columbia.
Yeah.
You learned and taught mathematics. It would have looked like you were going toward a serious career in academia. What did your family think of the idea that you went for it?
Well, it wasn't quite what my family thought of it so much as what some of my professors thought about it. They knew that I was, in fact, cutting classes all the time and going in for acting. However, I enjoyed mathematics. I was treated very well, very generously by the staff. I liked mathematics very much, and I spent another several years in Toronto in the graduate school. I was certainly going in to be serious mathematics. But here's the little catch. I was interested in writing. And if you're an actor, especially in those days, if you're an actor in radio plays, it didn't take long to think, my God, I could do better than this in the margin of a streetcar transfer, So you start finding, you want to start writing things. But the gap between mathematics and writing is not all that great. Mathematics isn't arithmetic, it's not accountancy. What it is the arrangement of ideas. That's what it really is. It's the arrangement of ideas on the one hand, and the looking for structures and patterns on the other hand. And of course that's what writing is. It's the arrangement of ideas and the bringing out of structures, particularly drama.
Of course, you didn't enter a vacuum. There was writing going on in Canada. What was the scene like until you arrived there? You said that you thought there was room for improvement. What was it? Dominated by American, British touring? What?
No, I was really thinking of radio. The situation. Should we let that go?
Yes. Let's try that one again.
I was thinking particularly of radio because in the early 40s that was really the only professional theatre in Canada. That's sort of hard to remember. There were touring companies, as you say. Touring companies would come by, and they were not connected with the Canadian theatre at all. They would come in. Donald Woolford, for example, used to come by. And Donald Woolford was the last of the old-time hams. He was, very impressive on stage, but he was definitely from the outside, bringing culture and civilization down from a great height, and then passing on. The main theatre, on the stage, was the Dominion Drama Festival. And that was very popular and enormously successful, and it was an elaborate series of competitions, and it was all gradually brought together. And then there was the Grand Drama Festival, and there were adjudications and all this stuff. And they were very proud of it being amateur. All the time, amateur, amateur, amateur. It was kind of like the old-fashioned idea of the Olympics. And there was the same kind of static went up when various actors, it was discovered, had actually appeared in radio plays and had received money, as much as $5 for half an hour, Are they amateur anymore? well, maybe they're not really amateur. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed in the Dominion Drama Festival. You know, what a world, eh? It was just incredible.
What was the scene like? You were in Vancouver then, around the time when you were awakening into the desire to create theatre. What was the scene like in Vancouver particularly? What sort of minds, what sort of seminal ground were you working on?
I'd say the main thing was was UBC Players Club, which was very active. Every year there was the so-called spring play, and the spring play toured BC and went to quite a number of places, a couple of dozen. And of course, you know, that was fun to do, and you know, you really got to see British Columbia by going to all these places. I was in 3 of the spring plays, the 3 that I were there. One of them, 2 of them, I was there with Arthur Hill, who later went on to a professional career, of course. He's an old friend of mine. We took Candida around, we took Pride and Prejudice around, and we took The Rivals. And that's a wonderful experience. There were also one-act plays that we did during the year. And the people behind it, I would say, would be Dorothy Somerset, who was professor of drama there for a long, long time, a very wonderful, intelligent, learned, compassionate woman, very bright. Sidney Risk did a lot of direction there. And Sam Payne, who was much beloved by anybody who knew him. Sam Payne was really quite an extraordinary person.
Did you have what we could call a mentor at that point?
A mentor? No, not really.
You started acting, right, and moved on?
Well, I was acting all the time. I did some radio jobs. I moved on. There is a feeling that somehow I belonged to the Vancouver acting group that was around Andrew Allan. I didn't. That was a separate group. I think I did 1 thing for Andrew, or maybe 2, I don't know. But I really didn't start acting for Andrew until I had already moved to Toronto to take part, to then work at the university. Then I started to write some things.
Can you give a little more detail about that period? Because my research does sort of suggest that you did move along with Andrew Allan and company when Allan went to Vancouver and then moved back to Toronto. I gathered that a bunch of you went east at the same time. I see you came here first. Could you please just clarify on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, Andrew came to Vancouver. He was Canadian, of course. He was on the Athenia, which was the very first casualty of World War II. This was the ship that was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland. His father was chopped to pieces by the propeller, sitting in the lifeboat next to him. By the propeller of the rescue ship, that was. And he went to Vancouver and took over to start doing drama in Vancouver. And there, the person who I think was most active and most interesting, and he has been a little forgotten, and I think it's a pity, and that's Fletcher Markle. Fletcher Markle died a little while ago, having struggled all his life with diabetes. Fletcher was a great admirer of Orson Welles, and one of the things that Fletcher did just before the Second World War was a production of Julius Caesar in modern dress, and that was a big sensation, you know. Fletcher was always very much at a kind of cutting edge. He was always rushing in second. I don't want to denigrate him, because he was very original. What he would see is, say, Orson Welles doing it, and immediately say, that's something I can do.
Is this spring
I'll
thaw?
repeat it.
Can we jump ahead? Is this spring thaw? Was he something to do with that?
No, but there's
Fletcher?
something important coming up here.
He was a satirist.
Fletcher? No, he wasn't. No, Fletcher was much impressed with Norman Corwin. Norman Corwin was the great American playwright at the time and wrote wonderful stuff. We were all impressed with Norman Corwin. And Fletcher carried on, did a wonderful coup d'etat. He sold a series of programs called Baker's Dozen. There were going to be 13 of them. And he hadn't written any of them, but he'd invented the titles. And he had one of the titles I still remember. Home is Where You Hang Your Heart. Sometime Every Summertime. Blood, Thunder, and a Woman in Green. Well, we want to hear that, don't we, you know? Hadn't written a word of it.
That's a deficit of 13 plays, I think. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
And Andrew Allan, did he not end up producing Baker's Dozen?
Yes, he did, yeah, in Vancouver. And then Andrew was made supervisor of drama in Toronto, and quite a number of people from Vancouver then moved to Toronto. John Drainie was an announcer at that time. He was an announcer who was... Sorry, I'll start the sentence. John Drainie, who later became the greatest of all radio actors ever, I think, was then an announcer in Vancouver, and famous for being a very absent-minded announcer indeed. And he once read the news, and somebody else's credit was the end, and he read the other guy's credit because he just, read what was in front. And there was it was during the war, of course, and there was a strange ceremony took place many times a day, instructions to lightkeepers. And in order to make sure that it was authentic, that it wasn't being the enemy weren't doing, they had a recording of The Road to Mandalay played on the organ, on the very reasonable grounds that it was sure as hell unlikely that anyone would be able to find that, So there was The Road to Mandalay, and then somebody would say, carry out instructions A for apple. And they said that about 3 times in a little 3-minute item, and it was repeated during the day. When Japan came in the war, we suddenly got instructions B, and we were horrified, what's happening, That only lasted a couple of days. But here's old Drainie, educating himself, as we all had to do, by playing 78s, in the announce booth, and trying out all sorts of things, and waiting for the cue. Suddenly the cue comes up, and he's got to carry out instructions A. But he's forgotten to put on The Road to Mandalay. What he's got on is Peter and the Wolf. So Peter and the Wolf comes in, and there's instructions A, and all the lighthouse keepers have a fit, The enemy is at our gates, what's happened, That's John.
How did he make the transition to acting for radio rather than...
Well, he was a wonderful actor all the time. He wanted to act all the time. He was lame. He'd injured his hip in a fall as a child, and he was very worried about whether he would be able to function as a stage actor. I think he would have been, but in fact he focused very much on radio for the very simple reason that that was the only way you could earn a living. If you wanted to get paid, that's what you did. It was either radio or the Dominion Drama Festival. There really wasn't much else in between, or else he left town, went to England.
Do any of his roles stay in mind with you?
John? Oh, absolutely, sure. He played the White Knight in Alice Through the Looking Glass, and that is absolutely incomparable. He played the guy who died, who was dying actually on the operating table in Mr. Ocularis, and it was an incredible tour de force. He also played the Senator McCarthy part in The Investigator. And John, of course, had a wonderful ear and was able to sound like McCarthy and act at the same time. That's not so easy. I mean, to do an impersonation is one thing. To do an impersonation and keep acting is something very different. So John was one of the people who came from Vancouver with Andrew. Bernie Braden was another. And Bernie's wife, Barbara Kelly. Bernie died the other day, everyone is... we're all standing on the parapet, so to speak. Standing on our genes is about what it amounts to. Bernie was certainly very prominent. Al Pearce came also. Al Pearce is now in the retired actors' home, and still seems full of beans.
Can Can I have a comment on a fairly gratuitously broad question, which is, how did you, Andrew, Allan, and some of these other people you were mentioning operate within a hidebound institution such as the CBC of the period with material that was critical of the day's values?
Well, it wasn't nearly so high.
Hilda Morgan, for example.
Yeah, there's a better example than that, I think, before that. It wasn't all that hidebound. That's the main thing. Became much more hidebound later. It was being run by Davidson Dunton. And David Dunton was a very, very flexible, liberal sort of guy. Liberal in the very best sense of the word. Liberal in the very best sense of the word. There was nonetheless a big pressure all the time for let's try and keep these people in order. Andrew did a series of programs called the Stage Series, which was Sunday night dramas, half-hour dramas, and every Monday there would be an uproar in the House of Commons and demands that somebody be sent back to where they came from. That was me, as a rule. Len Peterson was also, they were trying to get him sent back to where he came from, which was Regina. The principal guy behind it was a man called the Reverend Hansel, who was a social credit member, and he found it easy to be offended at almost anything. And so one of the things they then decided to do was to draw up a code, and a code is, always the, I think it's the answer that people give who have been educated beyond their intelligence, and there are quite a few of those around. A code will give you a set of rules. And a code was drawn up. And we had just won, I think, probably our second or third Columbus Award. In those days, it was very rare and very unusual to win Columbus Awards. And I had won it with an adaptation of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. And that seemed a very strange thing to put on radio, and in fact it was a big success. It's a great story, and it's a great radio play because it was intended originally to be played by masked actors, just carrying it in the voice, and all the gruesome incidents take place off stage. Somebody comes and tells you about it, so there it is. And there was a meeting apparently, of the supervisors. I wasn't there, but of course I heard all about it. And Ernie Bushnell, who was running the whole thing, began the meeting by congratulating Andrew for having won another Columbus Award, and there was applause all round. It was all very nice, and Andrew bowed and smiled and so on. And then he said, and now let's have a look at the code. We have a code here, and I'm sure that nobody will want to quarrel with one word of it. And the code prohibited a long list of things. Excessive sexual exploitation was one phrase, and that's rather nice because it suggests that there is such a thing as not excessive sexual exploitation. But that was one. Kinky sex was out. No incest, for example. Incest is absolutely out, no question about that. Particularly gruesome crimes were out, like parricide or matricide. We do not want to hear on the radio suicides, particularly the details of suicides. We don't want to hear about mutilations and all the rest of it. And, while all this was being read out, Andrew, of course, is reading this and doing a kind of checklist with Oedipus Rex, which contains all those things. And finally he said there are 17 items in the code, or whatever it was, and the play for which you just congratulated me breaks 14 of them. Whereupon Ernie Bushnell said, rather indignantly, well, what the hell, come on now, it's not supposed to apply to that. Then what is it supposed to apply to? That's the problem with codes, Another play that I did, which caused a big fuss, was a play called Hilda Morgan. Hilda Morgan was very realistic. It wasn't a verse play, it was very down to earth. It was about a woman whose fiancé was killed in an accident, and it turns out that she's pregnant. That alone was a tremendous uproar, absolutely that doesn't happen. And the next thing that doesn't happen was that there was pressure from her family to, as they say, do something about the baby, which she finally refused to do. And old Hansel was up in the House of Commons saying never did he think that the day would come when he would hear the word abortion on CBC Radio. And of course he didn't hear the word abortion. We'd taken very great care that there was no, it was very much more indirect. And Andrew was very wise in many ways, and this is something that we were doing all the time, this so-called golden age of radio. We were really with the wagons in the circle all the time. There was a lot of attack. We felt, I think, that it's the job of an army, of a general, to fight battles, but good generals fight battles on grounds of their own choosing. One of the things that they were very upset about was bad language in these stage series, and bad language included words like heck. Heck was bad language. Nowadays, words that end in a K sound don't seem to begin with an H, do they? But heck was bad language. Virgin was bad language. There was a big fuss about a stage play called The Moon is Blue, in which this terrible word virgin was used. So, that's bad language too. Well, Andrew went through the script very carefully and said, we're going to take out all the heck. There's going to be no heck. There's not even going to be darn in there. There is going to be nothing. If they want to go for it, they're going to have to go for it head on grounds of our choosing, and not bring in extraneous things. He was right.
How did audiences take to Hilda Morgan the second time? About 10 years after it first premiered, I believe, repeated again.
Oh yes, they liked it. It's been done several times since. Everyone seems to like it.
Did it not evoke the same
No,
reaction?
not at all. Things have changed.
Okay. What was your most productive period in terms of writing? And can we have approximately a guess of how many plays you've written?
Yeah, I can get it. It's frightening. Because I did a large number of school broadcasts. All of those were dramatized, of course. So as far as sitting down at the typewriter, you have to devise a dialogue, you have to write a little play, And I would count those in too, and it comes to about 800. Full-length plays and adaptations and things of that kind, that would be maybe a couple of hundred.
So you worked in the school broadcast quite near here, wasn't it?
Ron Green's Academy of Radio Arts, yes. That was for veterans coming back from the war, Second World War, and it was, I think, very successful. There was a kind of snarky comment around that it was some kind of rip-off. It wasn't a rip-off. Lorne taught announcing, I was teaching writing, Andrew was teaching direction, it's the best we'd got. And a lot of people went on and had good careers. There was a scholarship given every year, and Les Nielsen won the scholarship one year.
It's a romantic lead, I think, at the time.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Sure.
So you would have worked with Barry Morse and that gang almost daily?
Yeah, a little later.
Yes.
Yeah. Barry continues to be a very close and old friend.
Calls you the great genius, Lester Sinclair. Can you handle that?
I'm worried by those sort of things. I'm worried by people, there gets to be a sort of standard vocabulary. Renaissance man is one that you hear, and I think that's the kindest way I know of saying that you're 500 years out of date, which is when the Renaissance took place. National monument is another one, and on hearing the words, I can feel the pigeon shit, accumulating. I do my best, that's all.
They've given you a pin for
the Order of Canada. Yes.
Can you please tell me about that? What was what were the comments they gave when presenting it?
I think that was just for devotion to broadcasting. The Order of Canada is supposedly given not for achievement only, but for actually getting in there and getting your fingernails dirty. And I think I've certainly worked hard in broadcasting. I also worked hard for the Canadian Conference of the Arts. It's all those sort of things.
could you have foreseen a career in drama without the CBC?
No, certainly not. There was a little small amount of drama done on some of the private stations, radio stations. A man called Howard Milsom, who I think has not received the credit he deserves. He was a very kindly guy, and he used to hire people. Better than hire them, he didn't even hire them. What he would do is put you in the plays, and that's what Andrew Allan was doing in Toronto before he went to England for a while and then came back. Andrew was so good at working the microphones because he was an operator. He was an announcer operator, and I think it was at CFRB, and they allowed him, just for the hell of it, to do after midnight dramas. So he was doing all kinds of, strange, weird dramas were going on after midnight. He put on the Cenci, for example. The Cenci is a play by Shelley, and is a verse play, and is an absolutely gruesome story. One of these really horrifying Gothic stories about a father who is raping his daughter, and finally the daughter and the mother murder him with an axe. And at that very moment the papal legate arrives, to see Dad, and there's Dad all chopped up in pieces. I always think of things like the Cenci when people say, why do we have so much horrible stuff on television and radio? Why don't we go back to the good old classics? Those are the good old classics, that's what they're like. And Andrew had in that play somebody who he said was a very nice, kind, dear, sweet girl from Rosedale. And Rosedale was a very important place in those days, of course. And she was very fond of her mother and very fond of small furry animals and things of that kind, but she was not quite the person to be playing Beatrice Cenci. And she couldn't get away from a certain sort of style of speech. And when Andrew was feeling disconsolate, he would remember always that what she said and the way she said it was this. Dad has just been chopped up. The trumpet sounds, and she says, "Hark! I hear the castle horn. My God, it sounds like the last trump." Well, at 1 o'clock in the morning in those days, not bad. At least you've heard it, And I give her, I don't know who it was, great credit for doing all that. It'll probably turn out to have been Fran Hyland in an earlier incarnation or something. Who knows, But somebody went in there and made the effort.
As per writers, was Andrew Allan very accommodating? Was it a free rein?
Yes, very much so. He felt it was a writer's medium. He was very disorganized. You could go in and sell him a script, so to speak. He was always running short of material, so if you could get something in the next 10 days, that would be fine. There was a big change, a big and important change, when they moved from half an hour to an hour. It's a half-hour radio show has a completely different form from an hour. An hour is really a full-length play, and there's a lot more work and structure in it. There's just no question about that. A half-hour thing can be an expanded anecdote, but an hour cannot. So immediately the amount of original plays dropped very much indeed. What you could do, however, was adaptations. So we started to do more adaptations. I did a lot of adaptations. I enjoyed doing them. I learned a lot from them, of course. And the secret in doing adaptation was, given that you'd had a lot of technique, but the great secret was spotting that something or other, like Oedipus Rex, would adapt easily. That in fact, it doesn't look like it at first sight, but it's just hovering just under the surface. There it is, almost a radio play right there.
Just when I leave a tape change right now.
Okay.